Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our Steftalks webinar as we are going to learn about how to identify emerging risk. It's all about data. So we have three great speakers joining us today. I will have them introduce themselves in a bit. If you have any questions during the webinar, go ahead and drop them in the question box on your screen. And we will, depending on time, we will have a 5-minute Q&A at the end of the webinar. We will go through some of your questions. We are recording this session, so we will be sending out a link to the recording as well as some key takeaways that we want you to remember that will be highlighted in this webinar. So I hope you enjoy this time with us, and let's go ahead and get started.
Yep.
Next slide. Is it going? There you go. So hey everyone, thanks for joining today. I'm Eric Edgerton. I'm the director of the Salesforce practice here at Stefanini. I'm responsible for all of our Salesforce implementation and consulting services in North America and Asia Pacific.
Hello, my name is Maria Resnick. Thank you all for joining as well. I work at Bit4. I head up product management and innovation and mainly focused in financial services.
Hello everyone, this is Chauvin here. I'm working as Salesforce consultant with Stefanini and working with Salesforce Einstein for a long time now.
Great. All right, so I'm going to kick this off, and I wanted to start with an interesting fact. You know that there's some 2.5 quintillion bytes of data created every day worldwide, and that's, you know, if you think about it, it's 2.5 billion gigabytes. That's a lot of data. Most of it's unstructured. It comes from a variety of sources. You know, we have connected cars, smart devices, Twitter feed, social media, news articles. It's just a variety of data. And so, you know, and obviously in the last 10 years or so, we've seen significant advances in big data, data science, artificial intelligence, and a variety of other technologies that are not only fueling digital transformation, but are creating new opportunities for businesses that are able to harness that data. So today, we're going to focus on a real-world application of data science and AI and how we can gain quantifiable insights from large amounts of unstructured data. Next slide. And so this is just a very high-level overview of, you know, it's actually a project that we implemented together. But Maria is going to discuss the principles behind how to mine unstructured data sources and apply AI techniques, specifically natural language processing, deep mining, and then use key phrase extraction, sentiment analysis, and trending to identify key business drivers and risks from that data. And then Chauvin is going to step us through an overview of Einstein analytics. It's actually an analytics capability that's built into Salesforce, the Salesforce platform. It gives us the ability to use or to ingest large data sets external to Salesforce, and then use lenses, dashboards, and other capabilities that are built into Einstein to allow an analyst or any business user really to quickly view that data, identify, you know, using sentiment analysis, identify, you know, trends and risks and so forth, and then track that data as either opportunities and risks within Salesforce. And so with that, I'm turn it over to Maria.
Thank you very much, Eric. So I wanted to start off by just sort of painting the picture of where we are today, right? Many of us are dealing with a lot of challenges. We obviously are always top of mind. Relationship management is key to our businesses. But data is always a challenge, and being able to gather and collect information in an effective way and stay on top of those relationships and understand what's happening without being annoying and sort of clingy with our clients. We want to understand what's going on there. And that transparency is sometimes, difficult to achieve. And then now you look at things like COVID and what's happening with the economy and being in a recession. These factors all kind of delve into making it even harder, more like a perfect storm, if you will, of being able to stay on top of those relationships. So in order for you to have those effective relationships, you need to really understand the challenges that your customers are going through. You need to anticipate their needs, and you need to help identify some of those emerging risks that they're coming up against. And obviously, how do you do that? Well, information starts to become more and more critical on being able to do that. So in the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about unstructured data. Unstructured data, as Eric mentioned, is one of the predominant forms of data in the quintillion number of gigabytes out there. There's a huge amount of data, and mainly in that unstructured space. So what does that mean? It resides in textual data, like news articles, press releases, online content, blogs, Twitter, social media, filings, you name it. I mean, anything that is based in text format is definitely a huge data portion. Then you have things like video data and audio data. There's more and more evolutions of different types of data that contain valuable information. So how can we use, today I'm really going to talk specifically about textual unstructured data. That's probably where most of the advancements have taken place, and where deep learning and concepts that we're going to talk about, like NLU, are really taking a great form. And so the kinds of unstructured data, red flags, if you will, that you can pick up from unstructured data range anywhere from financial type of indicators, for example, could be aggressive cost cutting. You have companies announcing that they are going to be slashing their prices. Everybody in the retail sector seems to be 70% off discount. I'm not sure why 70, but 70 is the new 50. So you have all this information about dividend changes in policy. You have buybacks. You have executive trading on the public side. You have all kinds of information on the financial side. You have legal and risk type issues that emerge. So could be, lawsuits, class actions that are emerging, regulatory investigations, ESG. I kind of put in that category because you have a lot of companies that are doing great things and emerging out of this. Out of these challenges as winners, because they're really taking a positive social stance or a positive governance and environmental stance. But they're ones who continue to violate those ESG norms. And so, being able to identify those as risks is really becoming more and more important. In the labor area, you have trends of turnover, layoffs. Obviously, right now with COVID, unemployment rates being what they are, who's coming back to work, who's going to stay out of work, being able to really understand how your clients are adjusting to this new normal is essential. Even on the strategy front, you find great content out there in unstructured space, and again, could be good indicators of risk. But things like a simple decision like switching auditors, that is a big red flag, right? Could just be simply they're switching auditors, or could be there's something kind of going on underneath that. Large-scale re-engineerings and digital transformations, how competitors in the landscape are doing and how they position against that. So as you can see, lots of different kinds of information you can gather from unstructured data. All different areas of coverage that you can stay on top of. And, expanding, contracting are big issues right now. But even as we get past COVID, there's always going to be things like capital raising and M&A, and what are those kinds of activities, companies spinning off a part of their business to generate cash to be able to, invest in other areas of their business. So these are just, again, examples of the kinds of red flags that you can find within the unstructured data world. On the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about, so, okay, clearly there's a lot of data. I don't think anybody would now question that with Eric's great stat. But what happens with that data that it isn't just magically going to combine itself and be beautiful. There's a lot of steps that go behind making that data ready for analytics. And so if many of you who are on the call and have had the pleasure or misery of combining data sets and cleaning data sets and normalizing data sets would probably know this is an oversimplification of a 4-step process. This many times in companies like Bit4, for example, we have about 50 different analyzers we run on data on a daily basis. And those analyzers range from, a simple ingestion, text normalization, or encoding type of analyzer, to very sophisticated analyzers that are looking for sentiment analysis and being able to interpret processed data or machine readable data into insights. So if you start off with that first step is really the ingesting. It's ingesting and aggregating. You've got, a bunch of information. Where is your repository? Where are you pulling it in? The next step, once you've kind of got it somehow in a same environment, is then normalizing that data. So what do I mean by normalizing? If you are doing things like the news, or normalizing information like press releases and filings or earnings transcripts, you need to think, how are you going to map that back to the relevant entity? So if the entity you're looking at are companies, and you care about public companies or private companies, you need to first have a really good database that covers the whole scope of those entities that you want to track. And then you have to have that normalization process take place, which basically says, I know how to recognize IBM as a company in every type of literature or unstructured data that I can see. I can see it written as International Business Machines. I can see it as I.B.M. I can see it as IBM. I can see it as IBM Inc. and all the many iterations that you can imagine. If you take that, all the aliases of a specific company, multiply that by the number of companies you want to track and follow, that is normalization. Once you've got a very clear picture of who you're following, you then need to go figure out how you're going to identify that entity in all of the content that you're going to see. And obviously some forms of content like social media have very different vernaculars than you might have in a Reuters publication. So, or for example, like a legal source that is like Law 360, right? They might refer to it very differently. They'll use a legal name. They'll never use, a colloquial name. So once you've normalized, which by the way is a huge and massive undertaking already, if you haven't pulled your hair out by then, the next step you probably will, and that is creating the metadata tagging. So you've got all this great data, you've normalized it back to an entity. Well, then now how do you extract the information, or how do you make that data machine readable? So if you have a filing, or if, let's say, a proxy statement, or you have a UCC filing, or you have a news article. Now, how do you take the information, the most important piece of the information that you're looking at, and how do you have a machine go look for that and pull that information out consistently every time? And by the way, not 50% of the time doing it right and 50% of the time doing it wrong, but trying to get to a level where a machine is smart enough, comparable, let's say, to a human intelligence, to be able to get it to 85%, 95% accuracy. That takes a lot of development, model development, training set curation. It involves a lot of data science and a lot of iteration. So you could start off by creating a model that gets you a precision score of 52%, and that's nowhere near where you need to be. You iterate again, and now you get it to 60%, and you iterate again, and you get it to 70. So you can imagine getting even to those final numbers and increments of an additional 1% gain or 5% gain take a lot of iterations. So being able to get the KPIs that you want and get your metadata very solid is a challenge. And then finally, once you've done all that, and now you have ingested, cleaned, normalized data that has proper metadata that you can index and derive insights from. The next final step really is now your data is ready. It's ready for analysis. So let's talk about on the next slide, what are the types of analysis techniques that you can use? And again, most of these techniques are going to be rooted in statistics or in data science and using different techniques in data science. So for example, sentiment analysis is something that has, in the last, I would say, 4 years or so, has really started to become a big deal in the unstructured data space. It's existed for many, many more years. We do sentiment analysis to gauge brand likeliness, right? So if you do a survey of a huge population of people, you can quickly find out sentiment. Do you like Nike or do you not like Nike? That's a rudimentary form of sentiment analysis. What we're talking about here in the unstructured data space is a lot more involved, because what you're doing is basically creating an aspect-oriented analysis. So what you're saying is, I've got a whole bunch of text in a news article, for example, that may be talking about 10 different companies in that same article. How do you know which is the sentiment applying to which company? How do you know what is the sentiment for each company? In order to do that, you can't just do a simple binary, do you like this, yes or no, is this good or bad? But you need to be able to do an aspect-oriented analysis that gets into identifying for every sentence by sentence, what is the aspect being referred to in the sentence? What are the words that are being used? Are they positive or negative words? And then if you combine certain words together, they might have a different meaning. So if you say, for example, a phrase like despite the challenging headwinds, if you look, despite is a negative word, challenging is a negative word, headwinds is a negative word, but you know when you put those words together, it's actually a positive phrase because it's a reverse negative. So having the ability and the tools to allow you to read semantic orientation and linear sequencing is essential in creating an analysis, like sentiment analysis. And all that is rooted in deep learning, in NLP, and categorization, right? Being able to understand how to put concepts together and identify an aspect, identify a verb, identify a modifier, and know, having dictionaries, for example, that can tell you operating profits. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, operating profits are good if they're up. Operating profits being down is not good. So, having all of that background is essential in your sentiment analysis. The other thing is thematic trending. You could do a lot with looking at using NLP to understand categories of information. So if you want to track a category of information like Brexit or subprime lending or 5G, you have to find a way to create a training group that says these are articles that are talking about that. And then you have to create a model, and that model has to be fine-tuned. And then you can create that category of themes, let's say. And then within there, you could use concepts like key phrase extraction. And key phrase extraction allows you, it's basically, if you think about it, like a massive word cloud. If you took every article that was written about 5G today, and you said, let me do a massive word cloud and find out the most relevant words that are being talked about today about 5G, you would be able to quickly pick out and say, here are the top 10 phrases or the top 10 words. That's what sometimes you can use to do this thematic trending. And how does that help you? Well, it helps you link things together, and I'll show you an example in just a bit. And then benchmarking, obviously, NLU can help you define peer groups. And if you can define peer groups, you can define how a company does against its peer group. And that's another important way of using machine learning and AI to really help you analyze data in the unstructured space. Obviously, tracking where you have divergences from those benchmarks becomes a very important indicator for a company that might be having some emerging risks, or on the opposite end, might be completely shooting the lights out compared to their competitors. And then finally, the prediction, this is sort of the holy grail. If you've done all these other analyses and now you've made it to master super data scientist, now you're at the ability of being able to do predictive analytics. And predictive analytics definitely involves a lot more rigor around it, because you're looking at a lot of historical data sets and you're combining, let's say, 5, 10, 20 years of data, and you're looking for patterns. And sometimes you have to use deep neural methods to be able to find those patterns. So for example, if you wanted to find what is the most common pattern of companies that are heading towards a bankruptcy. So if you took all companies that have gone bankrupt in the last 10 years and you looked a year before they went bankrupt, or 2 years or 3 years before, and you mapped out a pattern of behavior, you could then start to understand what drives or what becomes a leading indicator of a potential bankruptcy. So we've done that at Bitboard and found many interesting correlations between, for example, unstructured, or I should say, taking on alternative debt just before bankruptcy, seeing a high turnover in senior executive leadership, right? Especially within the last 2 years before bankruptcy, and that high turnover at those senior levels tends to be highly correlated with the predictive power of ending up being in a bankruptcy. So, obviously downgrades are highly correlated as well. The more downgrades you have closer to the time of the bankruptcy, the more likely, you are heading towards a bankruptcy. So those are all, I think, great tools to be able to understand your data and make sense and pull insights out of them. So the next slide, I'm quickly just going to go through the next two. The next slide is just an example of how you collect data and understand patterns, right? So this is an example of J.Crew, who went bankrupt in May 2020, and you could see the downgrades that happened prior to that. There's a lot that happened before even a downgrade happened. And if you were watching closely and able to understand what's happening in unstructured data, you'd see a lot of closing down of stores, a lot of, some debt, alternative debt structures coming in just before, senior management changes. So many of the things I've just mentioned, you start to see that all lay out very clearly on a timeline. And just being able to take all those signals and those sentiment analysis, what you could do is take that and just drop it into Tableau or drop it into Salesforce Einstein, and you can produce something like this and quickly see what's happening with a company and do it well before you hit the bankruptcy stage. And then the last slide here, as an example, is just with thematic trending. I mentioned, you can tag information into a theme, and then you can extract key phrases from that content. And what you can get is sub-themes. So if you look at COVID, we have a theme around COVID and sub-themes that have evolved within that particular area. Things like, for example, the shutting down of Wuhan, it was early on a big focus, right? And then it moved into another area, which was more quarantine and shutdown and travel bans. And then you move into other areas like brick and mortar challenges and collapses, and then all the way down even into the whole, what's the new normal? When do we start rebounding? And a lot of these conversations shift in unstructured data. It's where the market really is at the given time that we are. And what's really nice about this kind of thematic trending is you can link it back into, well, what's happening with unemployment rates? Well, what's happening with oil demand? Well, what's happening with Chinese exports? All of these things are linked together. When you have a big shutdown and quarantine and, closure of factories, yes, you're going to have a supply chain shift, right? You're going to have an impact there. And when all of a sudden people stop driving their cars and they're not out and about like they used to be, yes, the oil is going to go down, right? And so these seem like very logical things, but thematic trending allows you to actually track it as it's evolving in what we call this now casting mentality. And I think the final slide is really just a piece to leave you with on recovery. I'm sure many of you track it in many different ways. I always find New York Times really helpful because they're they paint a good picture of what's actually happening. And yes, there's a reemergence, and the U.S. is sort of struggling a little bit on a little wave 2. But this is where, again, unstructured data starts to become really important, because if you see these concentrations in these areas, very likely you can start to see impact again, whether it's driven by the government or driven by social norm. Fewer people might start going out in some areas that are reemerging. And what is fewer people going out means less foot traffic, means less driving business towards Target or Walmart or all these other stores that might be impacted, or the brick and mortar. So those are the ways that we here at Bit4 use unstructured data. We tag it so we understand what it's talking about, and then we put a sentiment to it and track that sentiment pretty consistently and ongoing on a 24/7 by 365-day basis, so you can evolve it as it evolves with the data. That's it from my side.
Perfect. Thank you, Maya and Eric. So as this is shown here back, last but not the least, let's look at the Salesforce Einstein. And as Eric and Maya explained, that we live in the world of data these days. And what Salesforce Einstein does, that it provides a very good insight into large data set. So that's the tool. It's very tightly integrated with Salesforce data, but it can work with with the data that is outside. So this is the whole architecture of the Salesforce Einstein. It sits on Salesforce platform, and as you can see, it can ingest data. The way Mela explained that how we ingest the data, and how there's an ETL tool which can make the data in the format which can be presented in some sort of visual. So it can ingest the data from any source, unstructured data, and then it has a very good ETL tool built into it, where you can make the data, merge the data, combine the data from different sources, and create a recipe which will allow to create a great visual, so that you can get the insight into the data. So that's what Salesforce Einstein does. That's one part of the Salesforce. There's this Einstein. There's another part, the predictive part, which is more focused on the CRM data, and we'll see in the demo that how it works. So this is the whole architecture, and this slide explains that okay, we get the Salesforce data from Salesforce data as well as external data. Salesforce data is much more CRM data, like cases, sales data, what what the reps are doing in Salesforce. So those kind of data. When you merge that with some sort of reference data from outside or external data and create the data set out of that, then Salesforce Einstein enables you to explore and visualize, and then you build a story out of it in the form of lenses, dashboard, reports, and the apps. And that's what we did. That we built this Selenium app, which takes in the Bit4 data, and we created an app. So this is how the app looks like. Let me go and start the app and go through the demo. So let me know if you can see my screen.
See it.
So, can you see my screen? Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. So as you can see that Analytics Studio Salesforce Einstein is very tightly integrated with the Salesforce platform. So you go to Salesforce and then you go to Analytics Studio, but this is just for the demo. You can get to this app through a navigation menu too directly. And as it is that a business user or any commercial bank user can start from the overview that what are the industries which are looking good right now, or what is the region that is looking good. So you can see the agriculture is doing well. All the others are not that well. The information is 0. So overall sentiment for the whole information industry based on the Bit4 data that we have is around 0.87, and it's average. And then agriculture is doing better. And then once you start drilling down, so you can select multiple here, and then you can start drilling down into into particular industry. And then once you then after industry, you can say that okay, show me everything that is going into California, and you see there are a lot of activities going in the San Francisco area, so you can drill down through that. And then after you drill down to that, there is like very good system that Bitboard has put together, that like what signal and what sub signal you are interested in. And signals can be like product market. These are the like news like news signal that Bitboard has. And like whatever you are interested in, you can get into that. So suppose if you're doing merger and like acquisition, then you can like filter on that one. If you want to do the product market, you can filter on that, and then zero into the individual companies here, like individual account, and then you can see that how actually this like this industry like this company is doing, and then you can see the actual news that is behind this all this sentiment analysis. So the whole idea is that you can start at the top and get into detail to a level of individual company, So that's what it does. And then it has a lot of inbuilt capability. You can reset it, and then you can search on. There's a lot of filters that you can do, which comes out of box with Salesforce Einstein. So you can just say that, okay, don't show me like everything. If you're just interested in how Salesforce is doing, then you can like filter on Salesforce, and then you can see right away that, okay, it's like based out of the San Francisco, and then you can see that overall sentiment is ever zero, so it's doing well. And if you want to do the actual news, then here are all the news. I will go over that how tightly it integrates with like with Salesforce account and all those systems, so you can directly go from here and visit the Salesforce account, So, and then once you are coming from that, like that analytics app, now you are into CRM. Then you can create everything, opportunity, whatever you want to do. Means you can create opportunity out of that, so that rep can follow there. So that's that's one of the key things that Salesforce Einstein provides, that you can take data from external, internal to Salesforce, and then you go to the CRM functionality. So that's for the US data. And the same functionality is for the international data too. Let me just reset the whole thing. So you can go over this one too. And then one of the key things that Bitboard has is the company score data. Here they put a score on each and every company based on the news analysis that Bitboard has done. And this is which we can filter out by the industry. So suppose if you want to do information, and then you can see agriculture, and then you see utilities. So if you compare these three industries here, then you can see right away that something happened in agriculture on there must be some news on May 5th, or May 6th, which has made the news go up, and then it stayed up. I think Maria can explain more on this one, but that's kind of analytics you can get, that what's the trend, like what's happening based on the news, like for a particular industry. So it's pretty good app. And one good thing about Salesforce Einstein, that there are a lot of things that is built into it. Means you don't have to build like everything from scratch, So you can put together this type of app, like in a month's time. So that's one good thing, because I think Salesforce has provided a very good framework behind it. So that's. Meera, you want to explain this, like this part, that what happened from here to here?
Yeah, there were just a few companies that are in the agricultural space that had some very positive news. And for example, one company that had, I believe, was doing some very positive ESG things and donating to the cause in COVID, which had a very positive impact on their score. And then two other companies that just had a strong performance. And, I think it was a second quarter or first quarter results were in for one of the companies that was in the forestry industry and actually doing better than expected. I guess that makes sense now when you think about it, because toilet paper demand during COVID was an issue. So I'm sure they started chopping down some more trees so we can use some toilet paper. So I think that makes sense now that I think about it.
Yeah. So Salesforce Einstein is a good tool to create the app. which you can like distribute about anybody, and it is very tightly integrated with Salesforce CRM platform. So overall.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, Chauvin, thanks for that. But this app that we've built, can be packaged up and deployed really in any Salesforce instance, right? Sales Cloud, Financial Services Cloud, or so forth.
Yeah, it can. Yeah, you can create a like managed package. We can create a managed package or unmanaged package, and we can install it in any Salesforce hub. Yeah.
Yeah,
and
great.
when we worked with Stefanini and Accenture on this development, one of the things that we were shooting for is also further integration with some use cases in commercial banking. And we were looking at how this can even integrate into Encino, into the workflow of credit underwriting. And the nice thing about having the Bit4 data directly in Salesforce Einstein is it just gives all that flexibility. Like Chauvin said, you can go down the path of enabling information for your RMs from a Salesforce side. So if you really want to understand on top of your competitors, your clients, your supply chain, doesn't have to be financial services. This is a use case. Surveillance of underlying companies is a use case that's applicable cross industry. And but if we do have other applications that have workflows like Encino, that downstream you want to be able to plug it into, for example, a due diligence process as part of your risk underwriting, or another process for vetting and maintaining a source of competitor insights. All of that is possible in that environment of Salesforce Einstein.
Great.
Thank you, Chauvin, for showing us the live demo. I think that was very informational to see what exactly it looks like in real time. So I think have time for maybe one question. So this question just is asking more, how can I use data to identify red flags a little bit better?
I can take that one. So, it always helps to understand the use case specifically from the individual, but I'm going to make some assumptions. I'm assuming you want to use those red flags to be able to make decisions on whether you should continue to do business or invest in a particular company or not. And the way I think most of our clients at Bit4 will use our data is they actually take it in through an API, or they use it through Salesforce Einstein, and they basically integrate it into some type of either relationship management tool like Salesforce, or they'll even have a proprietary dashboard, for example, that will track, let's say if it's supply chain, they'll track all their suppliers and they'll just pull out negative news and they'll create a filter and they'll say, show me any negative sentiment articles on a daily basis for any of my clients. And as long as you've got the list of clients synced with our data set, then you're good to go. There's nothing to be done other than look for that information as it comes into your environment. And then you need to make those decisions around, well, what does that mean? So for example, if there's all of a sudden some rumors about a class action lawsuit against an important company that you're working with, well, if they represent in your supply chain, 1% of your cost, maybe not a huge deal, but maybe that might, but if you are coming up for a renegotiation with them, maybe that's the kind of stuff you could raise during those discussions and say, look, we're not comfortable with this big class action lawsuit that you guys are heading towards right now. Or it could be that, you're looking to, if you're on the investing side in financial services, obviously you're not going to overweight on companies that have high ESG violations or risks, or that companies that, for example, are demonstrating high turnover in labor force, or are in the process of closing down. Like if you were looking at that chart from J. Crew and you were somewhere in the middle of that chart, and you said, okay, well, what do I do? Do I do business or not with this company? I think those are the kinds of decisions that this data is meant to help you with. Those red flags are meant to help you decide in your own way what is your tolerance of risk? And some companies, for example, in financial services, won't do any business with companies that are violating ESG norms. Other companies will have a tolerance and say, well, it's not so bad. Okay, maybe, you know, well, they were in the India Times, they were listed for child labor abuse laws or something like that somewhere down their supply chain. So IBM was working with somebody, and I'm not creating a rumor for IBM, but you know, IBM has a supply chain issue where they're using a vendor who has been fined in Bangladesh for, you know, child labor law issues, right? So those are the kinds of things that you can look for. That's how we would recommend using the data, using the combination of the signals and the sentiment to stay on top of what's happening with your portfolio or with your client base or your competitors.
Awesome. Anybody else have anything to add to that?
Nope.
Nope. All right, perfect. Well, that is, we're right at our time limit of what we like to keep our webinars at. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. Like I mentioned earlier, we are recording this session, so we will be sending out a link to the recording and some main takeaways from what we discussed today. I hope you have a great rest of your day and an awesome weekend, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Amy.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Stay safe.